What is going on, fishy friends? Rich here, Rich's Fishes, and today we're looking at what my old rack of 10-gallon tanks used to look like. I used to have bulkheads here in the front, draining down to this PVC pipe all the way over here, through those elbows, and right into the disgusting, nasty-looking utility tub. This is my fish room utility tub. Clean a lot of sponge filters in there, and it gets pretty gross pretty quick. So I've recently redid every one of the tanks on this rack. I changed those bulkheads from the front, got the tanks moved around to where the bulkheads are now in the back. Now, I had to do this on an emergency basis because I bent over to look at a tank, hit one of the bulkheads that stick out of the front, cracked the tank in half, glass shards everywhere, and I've never seen a tank empty so fast in my life. So, I decided it was time to change these things around, as having the bulkheads coming out of the front is just incorrect. Here's what I had to do to start all this. First things first, I had to actually drain out the tanks, clean them, bring my gravel vac over here, which right now is draining down the utility tub, right down the drain. I stop halfway through and I'm going to disconnect the gravel vac from the hose. I might have grabbed a different gravel vac, I'm not even sure. But now I'm starting to siphon that water into a 5-gallon bucket. I'm going to scrub it clean, and there we go. There's one of the fish I grabbed, a German blue ram that, for all intents and purposes, might as well be invisible because you can't see it at all in that shot. Anyway, back to cleaning. Another fish out of that tank. Just as difficult to see. This is some excellent camera work by yours truly. Let's get back to work here. So, we got to disconnect some of the drains, get these filters out of this other 10-gallon tank. I started draining down there through the bulkhead. You could see I twisted it down, and then I realized if I pull it out all together, it drains a lot quicker. And if I gravel vac on top of that, I can drain this tank lickety-split. Get all that debris out of there, and let's catch a few more fish. There's some more German blue rams in this tank. I promise you that's what that is, even though you can't see it. Yep, still can't see it. Okay, back to work. A little more water to drain before I can finally wrap up the hose, then get back here, fully disconnect all the drain hoses, get all the air lines out, pull the tank out, finish draining it down the sink, repeat the process with that next one, and then basically we come back and we turn the tanks around. Make sure the bulkheads are facing in the back, and that way those bulkheads don't stick out of the front into the fish room. So I test fit them there, I confirm I had enough room to actually make the bulkhead stick out of the back, and now I got to recreate a new drain line out of some PVC. I believe I'm working with 1.5-inch PVC here, and I'm not even measuring. I am test fitting in place, gluing as I go, lining up where I want these tanks to be, and I put marks, well, the bulkheads coming out of the back of the tank put some marks in the insulation on the wall there for me. I double checked that with a pencil and reconfirmed where they were going to be, and then that tells me where I need to snake this drain line and where these T-fittings need to be. So out of the bulkhead, out of the tank, I'll have a short piece of soft tubing, and that soft tubing will go into the opening in those T's in the PVC, and it's just going to be a gravity-fed drain into the utility tub. This is not how I do all the tanks in my fish room, but with this particular rack right over here next to my utility tub, it's relatively simple for me to use gravity to drain out of the bulkhead, right down the drain in the utility tub. And all I ended up doing was zip tying the PVC drain in place. Gluing in some of the corners over there, going around the other fish tank that's on the end. That's a 10-gallon tank holding a pistogramma hongsloy. It's one of the few tanks in my fish room that is not drilled with a bulkhead. I don't really have a good reason why, other than I didn't originally drill all my tanks. Drilling a glass aquarium always seemed like a daunting task, so I didn't do it when I first set up the fish room, and I wish I had. And now I've gone back and retrofitted most of the tanks, and I've just never broken that particular 10-gallon tank down completely, never drained it to take the time to drill it. I suppose I could try draining it maybe halfway and drilling above that line, but that sounds risky too. So got these tanks back into place now that the drain line is there, getting them all set up, and what I'll show a little bit later in this video, I did have to redo some of the vinyl window cling. Instead of painting tanks, I'll sometimes use vinyl window cling, and now that what we're looking at here is currently the front of these tanks. Only a few minutes ago, it was the back of the tank. So it used to have a piece of opaque vinyl window tint cling film. I used white and black depending on the tank. So I did have to redo that. I'll splice in some of that footage later on. But now we're just fine-tuning everything, making sure everything's in the right spot. These 10-gallon tanks do hang over this metal rack a little bit. I don't love that. I really wish the corners of the tank were supported. These are only 10-gallon tanks, and I'm prepared that there might be a catastrophe one day. These tanks should really be supported by the four corners, and these are not. Dangling over the edge like that is definitely not the most structural sound way to support a glass aquarium. But it's worked for me for a long time, so I'm not too concerned. The only catastrophe I had was breaking one of these tanks because of the bulkhead that sticks out of the front. Well, it used to stick out of the front. And now we're doing all this work to make sure that they can stick out of the back and get out of the way. I didn't originally set up these particular tanks in this part of my fish room that way because I was afraid about how much of the aquarium would stick off of the front of that rack into the room. I needed room to walk by. So, in my infinite wisdom, I thought putting the bulkhead out front would be better than putting the tank out front. It lasted that way for a couple of years, but it did prove to be the wrong idea. So, some of these tanks are refilled. You can see my sliding DIY aquarium lid on the tank on the left. The tank on the right also has one, but going in the opposite direction. And the tank in the middle has one of those plastic greenhouse style lids. Those are relatively easy to buy in large sheets, cut down to size as needed, and then you just remove the whole thing off the top. It's a nice, simple, easy way to get a tank covered. It's not a sliding lid the way some of the other ones are, and I do prefer the sliding lids in my fish room, and I do have a lot of those. But this particular one, I only have that polycarbonate lid sitting on top, and I just remove it whenever I need to get into the tank. It's really not that big of a deal. So those three tanks on the bottom half of the rack here, those are the ones I did earlier. Those were the three that had bulkheads sticking out of the front as well. All three of them have been moved around, and one of those three is the one that broke recently, which necessitated this whole project. And then while we were over here fixing tanks and drilling tanks, which I'll show a little bit of later, I had to add another tank over here. This was an empty spot in the fish room for a long time, and I grabbed another 10-gallon tank. I got it drilled and lined up with some pre-existing PVC drain that was already in this wooden rack over on this side of the fish room. And once all that was lined up, I took my measurements and I marked the spot on the glass aquarium where I needed to drill. I got myself a diamond hole saw, which I've got quite a few. I've bought dozens of them through the years, have quite a few down in the fish room. There is a certain lifespan to these things. They can only cut a hole in so many tanks before they're so dull that they really won't work. So I do kind of jump around and use different ones all the time just to make sure that I don't dull one out severely and get stuck without the ability to actually drill a hole. So after I drilled the hole and lined it up, we filled up the tank. And now let's take a look at how I actually drilled them and the opaque vinyl window film that I placed on them. So here is that rack after the tanks were removed and before we created those drain lines. You can see where the two aquariums used to sit, and the three tanks below were the ones that we got turned around earlier. The tanks missing off of the other shelf over here are on my quote-unquote workbench, aka the washing machine. And as you can see, the side with the bulkheads is not covered in window tint, but instead the opposite side is. Now before we can go and put these tanks back into place, we need to get the window film or the window tint removed from what used to be in the back of the tank and what will become the front of the tank. And we'll also need to add window film on what will become the new back of the tank. Here is a standard 10-gallon aquarium. I am taking my measurements from over on the stand where the drain needs to go. I'm going to drill my hole right here in the glass where I made that mark, and that's where I'll insert the bulkhead. And then I know it lines up with the PVC drain that's already in place over on the stand where the aquarium's going to go for its final destination. So once I got the hole marked, I just have to arrange the tank in such a way that I can actually drill comfortably. It takes quite a long time to drill through glass, even thin glass like these 10-gallon tanks. So you have to find a comfortable position, otherwise it can turn into a really long, arduous process where you're trying to hold yourself still and it can just be difficult. I always like to use a towel or something on the inside because eventually the glass hole saw will break through the glass in one spot before the entirety of the glass panel, and you'll get some drips, and that the towel will also hold the piece of glass that gets removed. Now, I've started using these suction cup jigs, which have a couple of bearings on it that allow the hole saw to ride in. This is a little bit easier than trying to start the hole saw freehand, where you have to start on a slight angle. I've done it that way plenty of times in the past, but I really do enjoy these suction cup jigs. You can find them on Amazon. Let's see, over here I searched for a glass hole saw suction cup template jig. And there's lots of different kinds. Some have two suction cups. Some only have one, like the one that I'm currently using. This is probably easier for smaller tanks, something like this. I believe mine came with a variety of different hole saws as well. And the size hole saw you'll need will depend on the size bulkhead that you use. These are what some of those jigs look like. This is very, very similar to mine, just a different color. There's a couple of bearings on the inside there. You can adjust the size of the hole that you're going to use, or the size of the jigsaw hole saw that you're going to use, by using these thumb screws on the side and adjusting the size of the opening in the jig here. And that'll allow you to much more easily drill this hole in the glass, which, as I said, can take quite a while. So back to the tank, inserting the hole saw into my drill motor here. Add a little water for lubrication. Sometimes I'll sit there with a squirt bottle. Sometimes I'll just pour some water onto the glass. I've used plumber's putty to create a dam, to create a little area to hold water while I drill sometimes. And then other times I just pour water straight onto the glass like this. And like I said, this can take quite a while. Here I'm kind of just adjusting the size of the opening in the jig. I guess the hole saw must have been dragging a little bit on the bearings, so I wanted to make it slightly larger. And then very slight pressure on the drill motor. I'm basically holding the drill motor up and away from the glass and not pushing down at all. And this takes quite a while, and it's a little noisy and annoying. And so, like I said, you'll be drilling for quite a while. I want to keep adding some water to keep the drill bit cool and to keep everything well lubricated. And it'll seem like you're getting nowhere fast, but you can see in the water that's collecting on top of the tank is getting kind of cloudy and chalky, and that is some glass particulate that's getting mixed in with the water. And then lo and behold, suddenly some water starts dripping through to the other side. It's dripping down through part of the hole that I've created while drilling, and now I'm going to keep adding a little water because the water's starting to drip through. And then you got to keep drilling for quite a long time. Even though it's begun to drip, it's still going to take quite a long time before that hole is 100% complete. So make sure to just keep adding water as needed, and eventually the hole is going to pop on out right on the other side, leaving you with a perfect little biscuit-shaped piece of round glass, or a glass hole, if you will. Then all that's really left to do is to remove the jig and clean up your mess. Then we can actually work on covering the glass of the tank, and you can use some spray paint to paint the glass. You can use a paintbrush to paint the glass. Lately, I like using this vinyl window tint window film. It's an opaque film. First, I just get the glass wet, wipe it down. Then I get the material and start rolling it out to measure and fit. Make sure I have exactly what I need, no more and no less. This stuff has that grid marked out on the back, which makes cutting it nice and simple. And I just use a scissor, follow the line that I want to cut on, and away we go. And then once that piece is cut, you're able to remove the clear plastic backing and then just apply the film. To apply it, you just wet the glass down again. Once that clear backing is removed, you line up the film where it needs to go, and that water allows you to keep moving the film around a little bit. I'll cut around that bulkhead after everything's been fully squeegeed out and in its final place. And after it's applied, you can just use a credit card or this little squeegee thing, or whatever you might have that can get some of the water out from behind the film, because that will show bubbles if there's any water behind it. And then you can go ahead and repeat the same exact process on all the sides of the tank that need to be covered. And like I said, some tanks I use a black film, some tanks I've used a white film. Those are really the only two colors I've worked with. Other than that, I like to use brown sand colored spray paint sometimes to paint the bottom of the tanks. And then when things are all said and done, this is pretty much what the tank will look like in the end, at least if you use the black window film. Now here I am installing the bulkhead by hand before I walk it over to the stand, which you've already seen me install it into the stand earlier, so we're a little backwards here, but that's okay. Tighten these things by hand, no need to ever use a wrench, and that's the finished product. I think that's going to be it for this one, guys. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, follow along for my next video, and I'll see you next time.